In a cramped cobbler's workshop in the English town of Rugby, sometime around the middle of the 1800s, a woman named Rebecca Linden was slowly dying. She was the mother of 17 children, and every day, between caring for them, she performed one strange and dangerous task. She pressed her lips to the snapped stem of a clay pipe, and she blew. On the other end of that pipe was the bladder of a freshly killed pig. Her job was to inflate it by lung power alone, so that her husband could stitch leather panels around it and sell it to the schoolboys next door. The boys wanted footballs, and if the pig had been sick, the disease went straight from the animal's organ, down the pipe, and into Rebecca's lungs. Eventually, it killed her. That ball, the thing she gave her life to inflate, would go on to become the most watched, most kicked, most universally recognized object on the planet. Today, more than 265 million people play the game it was made for. A single official World Cup ball can sell for over $150, and the global market for footballs is worth billions of dollars every year. When the World Cup final kicks off, more than 1 billion people watch the same small sphere at the same moment. No object in human history has ever united so many eyes on so little. But the journey from a diseased pig's bladder to a sensor-packed sphere broadcast to half the planet is one of the strangest, bloodiest, and most unlikely stories in the history of sport. To understand where the football came from, you have to go back thousands of years, long before England, long before leather, to a time when the ball itself was something close to sacred. The oldest ancestor of the football was not English at all. It was Chinese. More than 2,000 years ago, during the Han Dynasty, soldiers and nobles played a game called Kuju. The name literally means kickball. FIFA itself officially recognizes Kuju as the earliest known form of the game. The ball was made of stitched leather and packed tight with feathers and hair. Players tried to kick it through a small, silk-draped opening without using their hands. It was military training, court entertainment, and ritual all at once. For a while, kicking a ball well could earn you the favor of an emperor. The game grew so popular that there were professional Kuju players, organized clubs, and even women who competed. All of it built around a stitched leather ball that, in spirit, is not so different from the one you can buy today. On the other side of the world, in the rainforests of Mexico and Central America, a very different ball was being born. And this one would change everything about what a ball could be. The Olmec, the Maya, and later the Aztec played a ball game using something no other culture on Earth possessed: solid rubber. They tapped it from rubber trees, and they shaped it into heavy, bouncing spheres. The Europeans who later arrived had never seen a material that leapt back off the ground on its own. To the people who made these balls, the game was not entertainment. It was cosmic. The bouncing ball represented the sun and the moon moving across the sky, and some matches reportedly ended in human sacrifice. Pay attention to that rubber, because thousands of years later it comes roaring back into this story and saves it. The Greeks and Romans played their own ball games too. The Greeks had episkeiros, a rough team game. The Romans had harpastum, a small, hard ball fought over so violently it was used to keep soldiers fit. But after Rome fell, the ball in Europe lost its grandeur and became something wild. This is where the story takes a turn nobody could have predicted. In medieval England, football became chaos. Entire villages played against each other across open countryside, with no real limit on the number of players, no offside, and barely any rules at all. The ball, usually a pig's bladder, sometimes covered in leather, was dragged, kicked, and carried for miles between two distant points. People were injured. People sometimes died. It was so disruptive that English kings repeatedly tried to ban it outright. In 1314, The city of London forbade it. King Edward III tried to stamp it out because young men were playing football instead of practicing their archery. And archery was how England won wars. Over the next few centuries, a long line of monarchs issued ban after ban, and almost none of them worked. People simply kept playing. For hundreds of years, the ball was treated less like a toy and more like a threat to national security. And the fact that it survived all of that royal hostility tells you something about how deeply the urge to kick a ball is wired into us. And through all of it, the ball stayed almost unchanged. An animal bladder, inflated by mouth, wrapped in leather, lopsided and unpredictable. Whatever shape the bladder happened to be, that was the shape of your ball. No two were the same. A round ball was a fantasy. And here is the part that does not get enough credit. The modern game could never have been born until somebody fixed the ball itself. That somebody, indirectly, was an American with no interest in football at all. His name was Charles Goodyear. In the 1830s, Goodyear was obsessed with rubber, that same miraculous material the Maya had used, but with one problem. Natural rubber turned sticky in heat and brittle in cold. It was useless for almost anything. After years of failed, near-ruinous experiments, Goodyear discovered that heating rubber with sulfur transformed it into something stable, springy, and strong. He patented this process, called vulcanization, in the 1840s, and in 1855, Goodyear built something the world had never seen: the first football made of vulcanized rubber. One of those early Goodyear balls survives to this day in a Hall of Fame in the United States. The rubber ball bounced beautifully, perhaps too beautifully, but the breakthrough was clear. The ball no longer had to depend on a dead animal. Then, in 1862, the story comes back to that workshop in Rugby, and to the man whose wife had just died inflating pig bladders. His name was Richard Linden. Haunted by what had happened to Rebecca, Linden set out to create a ball that no one would ever have to risk their life to inflate. He took India rubber and formed it into an inflatable inner bladder that could be pumped up with air and would hold its shape. The problem was that rubber was far too tough to blow up by mouth. So Linden looked at a simple medical tool, an ear syringe, and scaled it up into a brass hand pump. For the first time in history, a ball could be inflated mechanically, to a controlled pressure, into a controlled shape. Linden won medals for his invention at an exhibition in London. And here is the detail that everyone missed at the time. Richard Linden never patented any of it. Not the bladder, not the pump, not the ball. He let the single most important advance in the history of the ball slip through his fingers, and he never grew rich from it. But his rubber bladder did something far bigger than make him money. It made the round ball possible. And the round ball was about to get its first ever rule book. In 1863, a group of men gathered in a London pub and founded the Football Association. They were trying to settle a furious argument that had been simmering for years. Should you be allowed to carry the ball and tackle, or only kick it? That single disagreement split the sport in two, permanently. One side kept the handling game, that became rugby, named after Linden's own town. The other side banned handling and created the kicking game we now simply call football, or soccer. It is one of history's quiet ironies that the modern world's two great oval and round ball sports were both born from the same town, the same workshops, and very nearly the same ball. When the FA wrote its very first rules, it said almost nothing about the ball itself. But in 1872, the rules were revised, and a single line was added that still echoes through the game today. The ball must be spherical, with a circumference of 27 to 28 inches. For the first time in thousands of years, a football had an official size. That number, give or take, is still the law in FIFA's rulebook right now. By the early 1900s, the ball had settled into a recognizable form. A tanned brown leather cover, usually 18 sections stitched into 6 panels, wrapped around a rubber bladder, laced up tight on one side like a boot. It was a real, manufactured, repeatable object. But it carried a brutal flaw. And anyone who has heard the old stories knows exactly what it was. That leather drank water. On a rainy day, a football could nearly double in weight as the match went on, turning into a sodden, punishing slab. And that lace, the stitched-up slit where the bladder went in, was hard as rope. Heading a wet leather ball, especially across that lace, could split your skin or rattle your skull. Generations of players suffered for it, and decades later, doctors would begin linking those heavy old leather balls to brain injuries in retired professionals. The ball was beautiful, and it was dangerous, and for half a century manufacturers fought to make it drier, adding cloth layers in the 1940s, then waterproof paints and synthetic coatings in the 1950s and 60s. But before the ball became modern, it became global, and it traveled the world on the backs of soldiers and sailors. This is where the football story gets bigger than England. Wherever the British Empire went in the late 1800s, to India, to Africa, to South America, to the docks of Buenos Aires and the mines of Brazil, the leather ball went with it. British engineers, traders, and railway workers carried footballs in their luggage, kicked them around on their days off, and taught the local game to whoever was watching. Within a generation, the colonized and the working classes had taken the colonizers' toy and made it unmistakably their own. By the time the first World Cup was held in 1930, the country that won it was not England at all. It was Uruguay. And here is the part of the football's history that almost sounds invented. On Christmas Day in 1914, in the frozen no-man's land between the trenches of the First World War, British and German soldiers reportedly climbed out, walked toward each other, and played football with whatever ball or bundle they could find. For a few hours, the same object that kings had once tried to ban became a fragile, impossible truce between enemies trying to kill each other. No other object in history has ever done that. The ball had gone from a threat to national security to a symbol of shared humanity in less than a century. But the single most famous leap in the ball's design wasn't about water at all. It was about television. In 1970, the World Cup was held in Mexico, and for the first time, it would be broadcast around the world, much of it on black and white TV. The problem was simple. A plain brown ball was almost impossible to see on a grainy black and white screen. So Adidas produced a ball built for the camera. They took a geometric shape, 20 white hexagons and 12 black pentagons, stitched into a near-perfect sphere. And that pattern of black and white patches made the ball pop against the pitch and let viewers track its spin. They called it the Telstar, named after the television satellite. And in doing so, they created the single most iconic image of the sport. When a child anywhere on Earth draws a football today, they almost always draw black pentagons on a white ball. That picture in everyone's head is the Telstar, an advertising decision from 1970 that became the universal symbol of the game. That black and white sphere is built on real mathematics. The shape, 20 hexagons and 12 pentagons, is a truncated icosahedron, the same structure scientists later named the buckyball. For the rest of the 20th century, this was simply what a football was. And this is the part of the story the industry spent decades trying not to talk about. By the late 20th century, the hand-stitched football had quietly become the product of one specific place, the city of Sialkot in Pakistan. To this day, Sialkot produces a huge share of the world's footballs, by many estimates the majority of all hand-stitched balls on Earth. A single ball is made of those 32 panels and requires roughly 690 stitches, and for a long time, every one of those stitches was sewn by hand, often in homes and small sheds spread across more than 1,000 villages. In 1996, a magazine published a photograph that the world could not ignore. A 12-year-old boy, hunched over, stitching a football destined for a major Western brand for a few cents a ball. Investigations estimated that around 7,000 children were working in football stitching in the Sialkot district. The work paid so little, and the supply chain was so tangled across thousands of homes, that brands selling balls for over $100 in the West often had no real idea who was sewing them, or how old those hands were. The image of a child sewing the toy of the world's children for the profit of billion-dollar companies caused an international outcry. In 1997, FIFA, the International Labor Organization, UNICEF, the Pakistani government, and the local Chamber of Commerce signed what became known as the Atlanta Agreement, committing to remove child labor from football production. Over the following years, thousands of children were withdrawn from the work, and stitching moved out of scattered homes into monitored centers, each one regularly inspected. But the reforms came with their own painful cost. Much of that home-based stitching had been done by women who could not easily leave the house to work in a distant center, and tens of thousands of them are estimated to have lost their only source of income. The ball that united the world had, hidden inside its seams, a tangle of poverty and exploitation that no amount of advertising could fully smooth over. The next time you see a gleaming match ball held up on a stadium podium, remember the hands, often unseen, often underpaid, that put it together. Today, the football is being transformed faster than at any point in its history. The classic 32 hand-stitched panels are giving way to thermally bonded balls, where panels are fused together with heat and glue instead of thread. This makes the surface smoother and far more water-resistant, finally solving the centuries-old problem of the ball that drank the rain. Machine stitching can now turn out thousands of balls a day, where a skilled human hand might manage only a few dozen, and a top-end professional match ball can carry a price tag of well over $100, a staggering markup over the few cents once paid to the people who stitched them. The global market for footballs now runs into the billions of dollars a year, and Asia, led by Sialkot, remains the manufacturing heart of it all, even as machines slowly replace the needle. But the cutting edge of ball technology has run into a humbling lesson. A better ball is not always a better ball. The proof came in 2010 in South Africa with a ball called the Jabulani. Adidas had spent 4 years engineering it, working with a British university and testing it in wind tunnels. They reduced it to just 8 thermally bonded panels to make it the roundest, smoothest World Cup ball ever produced. On paper, it was perfect. In the air, it was a nightmare. The ball was so smooth and so light that it swerved and dipped unpredictably, behaving like a knuckleball in baseball. Goalkeepers were humiliated. One of the greatest in the world called it horrible. A Brazilian striker called it supernatural. NASA scientists even studied it and confirmed it had a genuine, measurable knuckling effect at the exact speeds players strike the ball. It turned out that all those messy stitches and rougher surfaces of older balls had actually helped the ball fly true. The seams act like the dimples on a golf ball, gripping the air and stabilizing the flight. By polishing the ball to near-perfect smoothness, the engineers had stripped away the very roughness that made it predictable. By chasing perfection, the engineers had made the ball worse. A former player even wrote a long, open letter to the president of FIFA, begging them to abandon it mid-tournament. They refused, and the players were stuck with it to the final whistle. The Jabulani disaster reshaped everything that came after it. Every World Cup ball since has been engineered around aerodynamic predictability rather than smoothness alone. And the ball has kept evolving in a direction Rebecca Linden could never have imagined. At the 2022 World Cup, the official ball carried a motion sensor inside it, capturing 500 measurements every second and beaming that data out to help referees judge offside calls in real time. The ball that was once shaped by a pig's bladder is now, in a sense, a connected computer. The 2026 World Cup ball pushes this technology even further. So what threatens the football now? Not disease, not water, not even controversy. The real tensions are quieter. There is the slow disappearance of the hand stitcher's craft as machines take over, and the livelihoods that vanish with it. A centuries-old skill that may not survive another generation. There is the environmental cost of producing hundreds of millions of synthetic balls a year, almost all of them made from oil-based plastics, which is pushing brands toward recycled and bio-based materials. And there is the strange, almost philosophical question of how smart a ball should become before it stops being a simple object that anyone, anywhere, can pick up and kick. A ball with a chip inside it is a marvel of engineering. But the whole magic of the football was always that it needed nothing. No battery, no signal, no instructions. Think about the full arc of this story for a moment. A pig's bladder, blown up by mouth in an English workshop, killing the woman who inflated it. A material first shaped by people who saw it as the sun and the moon. A ball banned by kings, standardized in a London pub, painted black and white for a television satellite, stitched by the hands of children, and finally fitted with a sensor that talks to a referee. Every layer of human history, empire, industry, science, exploitation, and pure joy is wrapped up inside that one round object sitting on the center spot. It is the most democratic object in sport. You don't need a court, a track, or expensive equipment. You need a ball, and if you don't have one, you make one. Out of rags, out of plastic bags, out of anything that rolls. That is the real secret of the football. It is the simplest possible idea, refined over thousands of years into something the entire planet agreed to love at once. The next time you watch a match or kick a ball down a street, look at it a little differently. It is not just a ball. It is the survivor of an extraordinary journey, and almost everyone who ever touched one is part of the same unbroken story. If you made it this far, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the hidden history behind everyday things. And drop a comment telling me which part of the football's history surprised you the most. The dying pig bladder inflator? The ball banned by a king? Or the sensor that now lives inside the modern game?